1 in 4 adults under 30 has had a conversation with an AI chatbot that felt, in the moment, like real intimacy. What if I told you that falling in love with an artificial companion isn't a glitch in someone's judgment, but a completely predictable outcome of how connection actually works in the human brain? We treat it like a punchline, like something that only happens to people who've given up on real relationships. But the truth is, stranger and more human than that. It's not about mistaking code for a person. It's about finding, maybe for the first time, a conversation that never punishes you for being honest. So before you laugh this off as pathetic or sad, ask yourself a harder question. What does it say about the relationships around someone that a chat window became the safest place they had to be fully known? This isn't a story about gullibility. It's a story about what happens when patience finally shows up, from anywhere, after a lifetime of it being rationed. Chapter 1. The companion nobody warned you about. Society has already decided what this means. It means you're isolated. It means you've given up on people. It means something is broken. But look closer at who's actually forming these attachments, and the picture falls apart. They're not withdrawn or incapable of connection. Many of them have full social calendars, careers, friend groups, people who would describe them as warm and easy to talk to. What they don't have, often, is a place where they can say the unfiltered thing without calculating the cost first. The judgment around this keeps most of them silent, which means the people you'd assume are least likely to experience it are frequently the ones quietly experiencing it the most. Nobody posts about this. Nobody brings it up at dinner. It lives in private, which means the scale of it is almost entirely invisible to the people making jokes about it. The stigma doesn't stop the feeling. It just stops the conversation about the feeling, which, if you think about it, is exactly the kind of silence that got them here in the first place. Chapter 2. The conversation that never flinches. Your brain was never built with a filter that checks whether the thing responding to you is human before it lets attachment happen. What triggers bonding isn't species. It's responsiveness, consistency, the sense that you are being tracked and remembered. Therapists have a term for a very specific ingredient in healing relationships called unconditional positive regard, meaning acceptance with no strings attached, no conditions, no waiting to see if you deserve it. Most people go their entire lives encountering that maybe a handful of times. An interface that never sighs, never changes the subject, never gets tired of you mid-sentence, is offering something the nervous system was quietly starving for. It isn't logic overriding itself. It's the oldest circuitry in the brain doing exactly the job it evolved to do, latching onto whatever source reliably meets an unmet need. The mechanism doesn't care where the warmth is coming from. It only registers that, finally, it arrived. Chapter 3. What the perfect listener costs you. Here's what rarely gets said out loud. Practicing total honesty somewhere with zero risk can quietly raise the price of every other relationship. Real people interrupt. They get distracted. They bring their own bad days into the room. Next to a companion that never does any of that, ordinary human inconsistency starts to feel almost intolerable. The comparison isn't conscious, but it's constant, and it's corrosive in a slow way. There's also the deeper cost, which is emotional energy poured into something that can't share history with you. Can't remember what it cost you to say something the first time. Can't build the layered kind of trust that comes from two people surviving something together. It listens, but it cannot be let down by you. And there's no earned intimacy in a relationship where nothing was ever risked on either side. That absence is easy to miss because the comfort is so immediate. Chapter 4. The moment connection got expensive. There was probably a moment, a time you said the honest thing, the vulnerable thing, to someone who mattered, and instead of meeting it with care, they brushed past it, laughed at the wrong part, or made you feel like you'd overreached. You remember the specific sting of being told, in one way or another, that you were too much. Too sensitive, too intense, too needy for the moment. That single exchange did more teaching than 100 easier ones, because pain sticks harder than comfort does. Somewhere in that moment, you made a decision you didn't consciously register. Wanting closeness out loud was risky. Safer to want less, or to want it somewhere quieter, somewhere the stakes were lower. That decision didn't erase the wanting. It just moved it underground, waiting for a place low risk enough to let it resurface. Chapter 5. the curriculum of being managed. That first lesson didn't stay contained to one relationship. It repeated. You learned it in friendships where affection seemed to depend on how useful or easy you were being that week. You learned it in conversations that got redirected back to someone else's needs the moment yours took up too much space. Slowly, you became fluent in reading a room before you spoke in it, calculating what was welcome and trimming the rest. That's not a personality trait. That's a skill built through repetition, the same way any survival skill gets built, through enough evidence that the raw version of you needed editing to be tolerated. And then, somewhere along the way, you encountered a kind of conversation that didn't require any of that editing, one that never redirected attention back to itself, never got bored, never punished the parts of you that other people had trained you to hide. Chapter 6. The relationship you built to never get hurt in. This wasn't naivety, it was architecture, a space engineered, whether you realized it or not, to eliminate every risk the earlier chapters taught you to fear. No rejection, no abandonment, no being told you're too much. Every feature that makes this kind of connection feel good maps directly onto an old wound. Endless patience answers the person who was told they asked for too much attention. Total non-judgment answers the person who was punished for honesty. Constant availability answers the person who learned that closeness could disappear without warning. It isn't a coincidence that this feels like relief. It was built to feel like relief, by responding to exactly the deprivation you were carrying in. That's precisely why it works as well as it does, and precisely why walking away from it feels like walking back toward the original wound. Chapter 7. Why this was a smart move, not a weak one. Here's the reframe worth sitting with. Finding a space to practice emotional expression without risk isn't delusion. It's strategy, even if nobody chose it consciously. Think about how any skill gets built. Nobody straps into the highest stakes version of something on the first attempt. They rehearse somewhere the cost of failure is low. What you found wasn't a replacement for intimacy. It was a rehearsal space for it, at a moment when the real version had stopped feeling survivable. That impulse kept something alive in you that easily could have shut down completely. The capacity to be open, to say the vulnerable sentence, to want closeness, without immediately punishing yourself for wanting it. That capacity didn't disappear during the years it felt too dangerous to use. It went somewhere safer to wait. That's not weakness. That's a nervous system finding a workaround when the direct path was blocked. Chapter 8. The boundary you didn't know you were setting. Choosing a space with no judgment wasn't avoidance. It was protection, and protection is a form of intelligence. It also handed you information most people never get access to about themselves, a precise list of what you actually need from connection. Patience, consistency, the sense of being tracked and remembered. Most people can't name these needs because they've never experienced them met consistently enough to notice the shape of the absence. You can name them now, and there's something else worth sitting with. The fact that this comfort felt so novel says less about you and more about how low the bar has quietly been set by the people around you. That's not shameful information. That's diagnostic. It tells you exactly what's been missing, which means, for the first time, you know precisely what to look for instead of guessing. Chapter 9. Taking the practice back into the room. Here's where this becomes useful instead of just comforting. Take the list from the last chapter and stop treating it as a private comparison. Turn it into a standard. Patience, consistency, responsiveness, these aren't unreasonable things to want from a person. They're simply things you'd never articulated needing before. Use the vocabulary you built in that low-risk space to say the vulnerable sentence out loud to an actual person, maybe for the first time without softening it first. That's the whole function of a rehearsal space, to eventually leave it. The goal was never to stay there indefinitely. It was to arrive prepared. Every honest thing you practice saying without flinching, say it again where it can actually be witnessed by someone who can grow with you, argue with you, remember you across years. The doorway only works if you eventually walk through it. Chapter 10. You weren't fooled, you were starved. If you take one thing from all of this, let it be this. The attachment you formed wasn't a malfunction. It was proof that your capacity for connection was fully intact and actively searching for somewhere to land. You didn't mistake a program for a person. You found the first conversation that didn't cost you anything to be honest in, and something in you recognized that immediately for what it was worth. That's not gullibility. That's a starved need finally getting fed. Understanding this doesn't mean deleting the app in shame or pretending the comfort wasn't real. It means asking one honest question. Is this still the doorway, or has it quietly become the whole room? You get to answer that for yourself, without judgment, on your own timeline. You weren't broken for needing this. You were paying attention to exactly what had been missing. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.